We're still dealing with the Israel question, and this is the biggest single obstacle which Vivian and I had the most difficulty with. What does this Humpty Dumpty method of interpretation do to God's faithfulness? The obstacle and I have most difficulty with is this, brothers. If Jehovah gave these promises to Israel, and after all that's why we term them Hebrew scriptures, and if the Jews accepted them as the unbreakable promises of God who cannot lie, according to Titus chapter 1 verse 2, and Hebrews 6, 17 and 18, as they did and still do, then Jehovah is actually guilty of misleading his ancient people. For in saying that Jehovah foreknew Israel's rejection of Christ, we acknowledge that he never intended to fulfill these promises literally. If these hundreds of verses really apply to Christians, was not Jehovah perversely cruel to give them to Israel? If God could so deal with his ancient people, so many of whom had true faith, how do we know he will keep his promises to faithful Christians? That these promises won't be voided or cancelled or reinterpreted because of the deeds of those who are unfaithful. Along the same line, Calls would ask me, what can Jehovah's Witnesses do with a text like Jeremiah 31 verse 37? 31 verse 3. Jehovah says to Israel, I have loved you with an everlasting love. This type of vow, they affirm, only underlines the relationship that the Hebrew prophets declare exists between Jehovah and Israel. For Jehovah could no more abandon Israel for her sins against him than he could a wife or a son, according to Deuteronomy 14, Hosea chapter 3 especially, and Jeremiah 31 verse 20, or Isaiah 54 verses 1 to 15, where Jehovah asks Israel, where then is your divorce certificate? Many other passages we have found similarly impossible to deal with.
Without redefining virtually every word. Many of them we looked up in the 1930 to 85 index, but quite often the references we checked did not deal with the difficult verses or terms at all. A sampling of such text is found on pages 168 to 183 in the document that we put together. One example we might mention is Joel 3 verses 20 and 21, which says, Judah will be inhabited forever, and Jerusalem throughout all generations. Their blood guilt, which I have not pardoned, I will pardon. Even if we try to spiritualize Judah and Jerusalem, who in spiritual Judah and Jerusalem is blood guilty? And what do we do with verse 19? But Egypt will be desolate, Edom a desert waste, because of the violence done to the people of Judah, in whose land they shed innocent blood. Literally, Edom is desolate today, and their violent end was foretold repeatedly by Jehovah in Obadiah 8 and 17 and in Malachi 1 verses 3 and 4. The reason stressed being the love of Jehovah for Israel, even an unrepentant Israel. Obadiah, you might want to look at Obadiah chapters 10 to 14.
Verses
10 to 14, yeah, it's the one book.
One chapter.
One chapter book, yeah. And Malachi 1 verses 2 and 6 and chapter 2 verse 8. Egypt too has fallen from her former glory, and this great nation, once the world's breadbasket, is now mostly desert, exactly as foretold in Ezekiel 29 verses 8 to 10. If Jehovah has fulfilled these verses in the same context literally, how can we legitimately say that he will not fulfill Joel 3 verses 20 and 21 literally?
One of the discomforting facts that our research for the studies underscored is that many of the prophet's declarations concerning Israel's neighbor nations have been fulfilled since Christ's death, as acknowledged in articles the Society has recently published, such as the May 8, 1980 Awake, or the Awake of 1984, August the 22nd. Prophecies regarding Babylon, Edom, Egypt, Tyre, Sidon, Jerusalem, and many others have been completely fulfilled during the Christian era. The stated reason for judgment was usually animosity to fleshly Israel. Again, and often unfaithful Israel at that. For instance, Isaiah chapter 14 or Jeremiah 45. The point we find impossible to reconcile with the spiritualizing method of interpretation is that if God has been literally fulfilling prophecy during the Christian era, at what historical moment did he cease doing so? If not at Israel's rejection of Messiah, then when? The interpretation of last days prophecies like Matthew 24, Zechariah 12 to 14, Ezekiel 34 through 39, and Daniel 11 and 12, it is alleged depends completely upon the resolution of this question, i.e., when did God cease fulfilling prophecy literally, if not at Messiah's death? So in the next section we'll deal with Israel's continued existence, which is after all a miracle if we think that God is through with unfaithful Israel. Why does Israel continue to exist today?